Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
Welcome everybody to the show, especially my new friend all the way from beautiful Tiburon, California, Michelle Hughes. Michelle, how are you today?
Thank you so much, John. I'm so happy to be with you today.
And I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you, Michelle. Michelle Hughes is the visionary founder of Ageless and Timeless, as well as a monthly contributor to Top Doctor magazine. Michelle has dedicated her life to exploring the intersection of health, wellness, and longevity, interviewing some of the world's most renowned experts in biohacking and functional medicine. She's got a passion for uncovering secrets of timeless vitality. Michelle empowers individuals to embrace their ageless potential. So let's dive into her incredible journey and get to know Michelle better and how we can have better lives. So welcome, Michelle. How are you today?
That was a lovely introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. And Michelle, your brand, Ageless and Timeless, embodies a philosophy that resonates with many people. Can you share what inspired you to create the brand?
Absolutely. First of all, for many years, my career has been in real estate. So people would say to me, "Oh, you look so good. How old are you?" And I'd say, "I'm not saying I'm ageless and timeless." And that was just a joke. And then when I decided to go 2 feet first, jump into the podcast world in 2019. And I knew I wanted to do it on the subject on longevity. I said, okay, what should the name be? And I thought Ageless and Timeless, that makes sense. So that's how the name came about. And that's what inspired me since I was in my early 20s, I've been probably one of the first person in the world to go look for health food stores. And the reason was that I had a crisis occur health-wise, that I'd never been sick a day in my life except for the childhood stuff. And one day I woke up and I had these rash all over my body. Long story short, they thought I had lupus, and then that turned out to be a false diagnosis. But in the meantime, I turned my attention to healing myself. And I realized that I was getting bad information, or information that wasn't agreeing with my body from the allopathic side. So I took it upon myself to start looking more into nutrition and supplements. And really, this has been an avocation for me for all these years. And it was just a natural to basically segue from real estate into health.
And you've interviewed a lot of luminaries in this ageless and longevity space. What are some of the common themes and insights that you've gotten from them?
John, there are so many, but just because of the brevity of our time together, I'll try to keep it short. So let me just give you a couple of examples of some wonderful guests that I've had. Just so happens tomorrow I'm going to be on a consult with Dr. Dane Goodenow, who's the CEO and founder and the scientific advisor and inspiration behind a company called Prodrome Sciences. And he works exclusively with plasmalogens, which that's one of these words and concepts and treatments that no one's ever heard about. But plasmalogens are going to be the next generation in wellness. And he focuses mostly on the brain. The plasmalogens are a molecule, and they tend to be very important for brain health. So that's one of his areas, but he does work in all aspects of overall wellness and well-being with all the organs in the body. But I'm just saying the brain is probably the first and foremost focus. So at any rate, Dane Goodenow has been given a lot of kudos lately. He's been on many podcasts. You can probably easily Google him and read about his work. He put me, I was really lucky that he asked me to come into one of his protocols. So 2 years ago, I started with him and I took the first test. It's called the Prodrome Science Test. And it just basically tells you how your brain is functioning. and other organs of your body as well. But so tomorrow I will know, because I'm now at my 2 year mark. I did the test about a month ago. So that's one luminary that I would highly recommend it, particularly for anybody that's facing any brain issues. And fortunately, that's not me, but even just for overall wellness. And just as another example of another luminary that relates to that is Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's the author of the book called Ending Alzheimer's. And Dale has written that book to basically challenge people to start looking at their brain health when they're in their 20s. And his point is that if people started to treat the brain the way they treat the heart, where you go to your doctor and they immediately wanted to get your blood work done with the lipids and cardiovascular measurements, but they never ask you to test your brain. And his point is that if people realized that they could find out 20 years earlier if they were going to have Alzheimer's or dementia. And so most people don't know that until they're in their 40s, and it's even getting younger now. But the real dementia and Alzheimer's patients that you hear about are usually over 60. But the actual evidence of Alzheimer's could start as early as in your 40s. So when he says 20 years younger, he said, if you start testing in your 20s and you're going to, by the time you're 40, if you have anything, you will have already been actively solving the problems by treatments. Allopathic is his last resort, but he does do some allopathic, but mostly it's preventative. That would be somebody else, I would say, for everybody to, no matter what condition you're in, to start treating your brain as you do your heart and other organs of your body.
Isn't it interesting? I've talked to a lot of people like you do, obviously, in the longevity space. And if you think about it, our grandparents normally died of what they used to call an old age, right? And maybe they had heart disease, maybe they had cancer, maybe they just died because they were worn out, right? But now with modern medicine and nutrition being what it is, we're living longer. Not everybody, but a lot of us are living into our 80s, 90s, and even hundreds. But isn't it tragic when we see somebody that they physically might be okay, they might be mobile, but they don't know who their grandkids are? And it's exactly what you're talking about here. So glad you're doing that. And I'm familiar with the one doctor. I'm not with the other, but I certainly will be after this call.
Good. And related to that is the company called the DNA company. There's so many interconnections here, but let me say the DNA company is in Toronto and they test you for your genetics. And I recommend everyone do a genetic test, not the 123andMe type. This is the epigenetic test, and they do not sell your data. That's very important in that world, because that's what 123andMe was basically. I think they're now bankrupt, but I think one of the issues was the data was not kept private. But anyway, in the epigenetics world, and the CEO founder was Kashif Khan, who's now stepped aside, and the new CEO is Tracy Wood, who, by the way, is going to be on one of my columns for Top Doctor. She's going to be, I think, in the August issue. Look for her. But anyway, the point they make is that your genetics are not your death sentence. And so if let's say you have the APO4 allele, which is for Alzheimer's, let's say you have that gene, that doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. It just means you have a predisposition from your parents for that disease. But lifestyle, they say your genetics is 7% and 93% is your lifestyle. So I want everyone to know that if you do a genetics test and you, like I did, it's 60 pages long. And one of the genes that came up for me, a weaker area, is methylation. That doesn't mean that I can't methylate properly. I just have to be more focused on methylation, on basically the gut microbiome and all the pollutions that's obviously all of us are facing living in the modern industrial world. So that's another one, is what I would say is the DNA company.
In biohacking, the word comes up so much. What are some of the biohacks that you've learned from some of these luminaries that our audience can apply?
Dave Asprey was the one that coined that term. And it just has become the nomenclature now for trying little things. So like this Brian Johnson, you know who he is, right? He's the millionaire who spends $2 million a year on biohacks. So I'm not that, what would you say, committed. I think there's some place for biohacking, but some of the ones that I think, like if you read the Ben Greenfield column today, he had one that was on your oral health. And this is a biohack now with a new company that's developed an AI product for your oral health. So you can actually, if I'm sure you know this, John, the oral health really be a determinant in other disease conditions like like cardiovascular. So taking care of your mouth is oftentimes not even, it's like the same thing we talked about a moment ago, that people forget to ask about the brain. They forget to ask you, how is your oral health? And most people, if they go to the dentist every 4 months for cleaning and maybe a checkup, that's their commitment. But it could be that you have bad periodontal disease, you have gum disease, and that can actually help be a problem for the rest of your body because it does spread. So this new product that was on the Ben Greenfield podcast is, I'm going to actually approach this doctor, Kenny Brown. It's called the FENN product, FENN, and it's basically an AI generated data. When you use it, it will tell you what's going on in your oral microbiome.
Interesting.
So that's an incredible, if this thing works, that will be the next generation. As Ben Greenfield said, most people are still back in the dark ages using a toothbrush that they don't clean that, and they don't brush their teeth all that well. So it's very partially doing the job. And this will be a way to tell you what you need to do that you're not doing through artificial intelligence. Another biohack, and a guest that was on my podcast, is Dr. Patrick Porter. You may have heard of him in the Brain Tap.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are using that to gain a sense of calmness and basically overload of stress on the brain. And that is just a set of earphones that you put on, and it's just basically helping you to calm down, to meditate in a more controlled environment rather than doing it just by stopping everything and being all by yourself. This one is guided meditation. So those would be two that I would say are really good biohacks.
I've got Dr. Porter's product and I have used it and do use it, and as does my wife, and a big fan. Next question on this, Michelle. Functional medicine emphasizes a personalized approach to health. How does this align with your vision for Ageless and Timeless? And what advice do you have for individuals seeking a tailored health plan?
Good question. Let's see. Okay, first let's say functional health is looking for the root cause rather than treating a symptom. Allopathic medicine tends to be drug related, pharmaceutical drug related, and looking to basically help cure a symptom, but it often doesn't look for the root cause. So that basically sets up the difference between functional and allopathic. As far as Ageless and Timeless, my goal was to make a difference. I wanted to help people. It was my time to give back. I'd been working in the corporate world and then in the real estate world. I earned a lot of income, and I felt if I was going to get to this juncture, it was time to look for that, which I would do if I were not going to ever get paid, because I wasn't looking to do it as a commercial venture. I was looking to do it more philanthropically. So I had to ask myself the question I ask everybody when I would give speeches is, what would you do if you didn't have to worry about the economics and you could do what you're coming from your heart and you're most passionate about? And it was just an easy segue for me after what I told you happened to me early in my 20s. And so I aligned with my vision of helping people, but doing it through longevity and finding answers. And I noticed that 68% of the American population is obese, and some high a percentage, if not that amount, at least close to that, have diabetes or prediabetes. and or diabetes 1 and diabetes 2, which is diabetes 2 is the more recent because it is controllable, but it is a function of our lifestyle choices. So I saw people struggling and I thought, how do you make a difference in people's lives? And of course, the first response I had was information is power. And what information do you have, Michelle? I'm asking myself these questions. What do you have to share that you've done a lot of homework, inner work on? And how can you then combine that with your, I always call it pain to purpose to passion to power. So that's how it all came about.
We see examples all the time of, for example, the old kings of England were always very obese for the most part, right? And
Hmm.
they always ate all kinds of stuff. In the meantime, the peasant farmer was the healthy one.
Right.
The person with less that was eating the root vegetables and the basic food that they could afford, while the king was eating all the stuff and they had the gout and all the other things during the course of their lives. What ancient wisdoms can we apply today from some of our ancestors?
You just said one of them, and of course, that's the food. And of course, the food that they grew then or they ate then was so much purer than what we have today. So that would be where number one, where you start is unfortunately with the Industrial Revolution in this country, we started looking for the bottom line and a faster, more gross profit than we did the quality of the actual product. So I think that was a huge change in the when our diets changed and we became much more focused on the bottom line versus the quality of what was being produced. So I know people who have gluten intolerance in this country and they go to Europe and they can eat all the wheat and never get a reaction. So what does that tell you? That these people are growing the wheat over there without all this glyphosate or glyphosate sprayed on the product as one example. I honestly do not understand how we have allowed ourselves to get to a place where our food is so tainted and GMOs are commonplace, and yet we know that that's not ancient wisdom, that's modern technology. So there's what technology gets us into trouble. I would know, what would we do without technology? We know how important it is with our cell phones and all that. But then again, you have the same old thing as 5G and all the more current technology has also caused some downsides, like the EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, and so forth. So I guess I would just answer that question to say, if we could just go back to our roots, and no pun intended, but go back to what is like having your own garden, for example. If you have the space, even if you're growing in pots in your home, in your apartment, if you could just do a throwback to the way it used to be and grow without spraying pesticides, use water that is not tainted, that's a big challenge. The water is a big one because in the water are the pharmaceutical drugs of all the people that are taking drugs today, which is probably 80% of the US population is taking some pharmaceutical drugs. So you've got that, then you've got the runoff. So water is food is first, water is second. Of course, the toxicity in our environment by the spraying of what we just talked about with all the pesticides. That's why I love going to places like some of the blue zones, where they don't even know what those things are. So I would say modern civilization has great benefits, but great downside. And that those ancient wisdoms are not so hard to keep in our lives and use them as cornerstones for our health.
That was going to be my next question. I was going to put in there about the blue zones, and you just mentioned this. You read my mind, which is really
Yeah, well,
every time I see Dan Buettner come up with something, it's like I'm on it. I was down in Costa Rica. Just side note for everybody, I was down in Costa Rica about a month ago.
yeah.
Airport, they actually have a blue zone area that which is the blue zone that he talks about in his work, of course. But there's actually an area represented some of the products that come from there and all of that. But yeah, most of the time those are like ancient civilizations running around like lunatics, like the rest of us are. Next question on this, Michelle. You're a monthly contributor to Top Doctor magazine.
Mm.
What are some of the most pressing health issues that you are encountering and hearing about? And what do you propose that people can do to help themselves with some of these situations?
The microbiome is probably the biggest issue today because everything interconnects there. We realize that all health begins in the cells. How many trillions of cells do we have in our body? 90 trillion or something. I don't even remember the number. I know it's huge. But so mitochondrial health is where it all begins and where we have to focus. In the microbiome, we have all these mitochondria that are being regulated by our lifestyle, our food, our digestive issues. We don't have enough hydrochloric acid, or people are eating all these the SAD diet, the standard American diet. So they're challenging their microbiome. So I would say that is number one. Of course, right behind that is what we just talked about with brain health, is the fact that Alzheimer's has become a I want to say endemic to our society is so shameful because it doesn't have to be that way. And so that's the another one that I hear a lot about. And by the way, Top Doctor magazine is giving me a forum to put in print what I am doing on my podcast. My podcast is now going into its 7th year this month. But Top Doctor, I just started writing the column only this year. And it's now you're dealing with verbal and video versus print. So it's giving me another opportunity to present. And I do the presenting through the people. So far, I had Jay Campbell. The first article was in May, and the second 2 articles were in June. But let's talk about Jay Campbell because he presents another point on your point of answering your question about what are some of the problems. He's very focused right now he has been focused for his whole lifetime of career and health on testosterone. And everybody thinks, oh, testosterone is a male sex hormone. But no, women have testosterone too. And women need testosterone just like men need estrogen. He has written the Bible in 2010, I think he said, before anybody was really focused on hormones and hormone health. And other than to just say, oh, go take Premarin or for a woman, or there was just really not a lot of data on bioidentical hormones back then. But now it's like a whole new world. So Jay wrote the Bible that even today, Jay's not a doctor, but he's so knowledgeable that even the doctors use his Bible from that. It's been updated many iterations later on testosterone. But what that generalizes to from testosterone is the microcosm to overall hormone health. And hormone health has been one of the biggest mysteries. Your hormones are the superhighway of your body. But it's been one of the biggest mysteries of management to wellness until recently, when a lot of changes have come about. As I think, John, the last 10 years or the last 20 years in the longevity space has been like the last 100 years in traditional medicine. So anyone that's looking for answers has had more opportunity today than ever before. And with technology making its way into health, artificial intelligence, as we've just talked about with the dental product I mentioned, is one area, but it's in all areas of health. And now we have stem cells, we have telomeres, we have DNA methylation, we have the hormone stuff that I'm going to talk about, which is called bioregulators, and peptides, which is what Jay Campbell is also focused on. And it's another area that I'm very passionate about, is the peptide bioregulators, which help to control your hormone health. So everything is integrated. That's why it's called integrative medicine.
Okay.
To go back to your question, I think the hormones are one of the mysteries of wellness, and they've been very mismanaged. Just take your thyroid. I've had 2 really great guests on the thyroid health. That's Dr. Amy Horniman and Dr. Daniel Pompa. Both of them focus on the functional approach to thyroid health. But historically, the way they tested your thyroid was just to do the TSH test on your blood work. That's like reading the first word of a mystery novel and trying to know what the ending is. It's almost no data whatsoever for what really you need to know about the thyroid. But the thyroid is probably one of the most underdiagnosed conditions, hypothyroidism, in American medicine. Those are just three. I could go into more. The peptide bioregulators, as I mentioned, are the new darling of the wellness space. And that's where Jay Campbell is doing he has a new startup called Bio Longevity Labs. And I put that into the magazine article if anybody wants to read about it. And then in the next issue, you asked about the articles I've written. So then Jay was the first. The next one was Dr. Joseph Purita. And Joseph Purita is probably the foremost, I call him the granddaddy of blood plasma, blood phosphophoresis, which is blood plasma exchange. They basically take the blood, centrifuge it from your body, put it through an ozonator and put it back into your body as much, having eliminated or at least reduced the number of toxins in your blood. This is like that. And they also use a hyperbaric chamber. He has a clinic in Boca Raton, Florida, that anybody that's down there should make a point of trying to see Dr. Purita and go through some of his treatments. But that one is also done by Next Health in Santa Monica or West Hollywood. Darshan Shah, Dr. Shah has also been a guest, and he's not yet been in Top Doctor, but he's been on my podcast. And they do the same thing there. And I've seen Mark Hyman go through it. A lot of the savvy longevity doctors, Sen Tahada, who has a podcast, I guess you've heard of him. He just went through Dr. Purita's transfusion. So it's called EBO2. If anyone wants to look it up on Google, you can learn more about that. The other column I did is on the Biohackers Conference in Chicago, the Biohackers World, which you and I talked about just a moment ago before we went online and before we went live. And that one is Mick and his girlfriend, I think, are the founders of that. And they're going to be hosting, I think it's going to be about 60 booths, 35 booths of exhibitors. It's going to be a lot more intimate than A4M, which of course is like 1,000 exhibitors. So if you want something that's a little more like Radfest, it's just a little more intimate. And that's going to be in Chicago on July 26th and 27th. So I wanted to give Mick a shout out because I think what he's doing is bringing together people like you talked about, biohackers. He's bringing them together in one space at the Sofitel Hotel in Chicago for those 2 days.
And Michelle, let's talk about aging gracefully. Something I'm certainly interested in. I think our audience certainly is. Whatever age you are, right? We want to do it gracefully, right? We want to do it like Joe DiMaggio did. You know, he looked better as an old guy than as a young guy. But what mindset shifts need to take place for embracing aging proactively, but doing everything that we can to slow it down? There's an inevitable thing with life. It ends at some point, but it's how it ends and how we approach it so that we enjoy getting to the end versus the person with tubes in them and God knows what, you know? So how do we do that? And how do we age gracefully? And how do we get our mindset properly in line to do?
Dr. Eric Verdon, who is the CEO of the Buck Institute. Have you heard of the Buck Institute in Nevada? They're in Nevada, and they're just an amazing organization that's doing biological wellness research. They're probably I think they're still the only one in the United States. And they're more and more focused on functional medicine. They originally started out much more allopathic, but they've segued over more to functional. And Eric says he loves to give talks. He has been a guest on my podcast, but he said he loves to give talks when he talks all over the world. And he asks the audience, how many of you want to live to 120? And and nobody raises their hand. And then he said, if you could live to 120 and feel like you feel today, and then everybody raises their hand. So what is the issue? The issue is no one wants to get old and not be able to function and live healthfully. So the motto of the Buck Institute is live longer, better. And I think that is really the encapsulation of aging gracefully. So, how do you live longer, better? As we said earlier, knowledge is power. And with all the knowledge we have today, there's so much more opportunity to live longer, better. And if you go to the RADFest conferences, you know that they say that eternity is not out of the question, that we can live forever. So that's a little far-fetched for me. I still appreciate and respect them and Radfest, but I'm still looking at the 100 to 120. If we can live that long and live healthfully, then now the question becomes, what do we do with ourselves if we're going to live that long? We want to feel productive all those years, and if we're not in any way debilitated, then that becomes a social issue. What do people do? Then you look at the blue zones and look at how these people still find meaning in connectivity. I think living longer, better also brings up obviously the 5 pillars of health that we know about. We've already talked about diet, nutrition, and sleep, stress, supplements, and the one that people don't most talk about is connectivity. So socialization, feeling like you have close friends and families. And a lot of these blue zones, they're in traditional neighborhood areas where the extended family is a norm. In our society, in America, that's not the case. It tends to be that older people go to assisted living. They don't live with their children or their progeny. But that's really, to me, how you age gracefully. One, you have purpose in life. You have love in your life, because love is everything. And you've taken care of all those 5 pillars by finding answers that work for you.
Now, in your case, you had a breakthrough moment in your career with a very specific interview that really profoundly impacted your perspective on health and wellness. Who was that with? And tell us a little about that.
Whoa, that's something I hadn't really thought. I don't think it's one person or one interview. Dr. Robert Goldman, the co-founder of A4M, he's been a huge influence on me. But I'm just saying there are many others as well, but I just want to pick one for you to make it easier. What he has accomplished, what he and Dr. Klatz accomplished when they sat in their garage, so to speak. It's like the same idea as Steve Jobs. They discovered a concept, but where they took that original concept of bringing together medical professionals in a forum to share ideas and to learn from one another, and then they've taken that now to such a huge cohort. I think thousands of medical people are members of A4M, American Academy of Anti-Aging. And they've shaped not only the careers of the minds and careers of those people through training and classes and networking, but they've also brought to the forefront the entrepreneurs and the business side, many of whom are doctors, but many of whom are not, like Jay Campbell. So I would say that Dr. Goldman, and by the way, he's the one that introduced me to Rob Fletcher,
Okay.
who you and I know in common. And Rob is the business development director for Top Doctor. I would have to say he's one of the most influential men I've ever met.
You mentioned it a few minutes ago, and we've seen Dan Buettner talk about this in some of his interviews with what he does. We've seen other people talk about the relevance of this. I saw Walter Longo talk about this a little bit, and I've seen Dr. Lyle talk about this, and others, and certainly others. But how important is community in terms of aging?
It's just so important. That's why I said it's one of the 5. It's easy to talk about the other ones, the diet and the sleep and the stress and all that. But that's why I said people tend to forget about community. And yet, in every single one of Dan Buettner's examples in his book, and also when you watch all these documentaries on Alzheimer's and other health ailments, one of the saving graces of the people's lives is community. And so finding something to do as you get older, why is it that all these assisted living centers have some kind of outreach where they go out to the community and do things for other people to give them the feeling that they're making a difference? So I mean, for even as young as we are, I still think we always looking for ways to give back. You know, my mentor in my 20s was the chief of protocol of San Francisco, who was a great entrepreneur, but also a great philanthropist. His name was Cyril Magnin. And he ran a company called Magnin, and Joseph Magnin, both huge retail stores at the time. And he taught me through many different interactions with him about business and about entrepreneurialism. But the most memorable part of what he taught me was about giving back. And so I think when you're lucky enough to have someone like that influence you that early in life, and you carry that forward into everything that you do, and recognize that generosity and kindness and caring about other people, that actually keeps you young.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So speaking of projects, what do you got on the horizon?
This top doctor took over some of my time, but I actually just met someone I'm really excited about, who's a very well established documentary filmmaker. And we had a session on dinner on Saturday, and I'm going to meet with him again. I think I'd like to do something in the film world. I actually see that there are a couple of documentaries out on ending Alzheimer's or about Alzheimer's. I think that's an area where I could reach out to Dr. Bredesen and maybe do something on that would help more and more people to get aware of Dr. Bredesen's bold comment that Alzheimer's doesn't have to be the disease that it is, and we could end it. It could end up being like polio, where it's something we remember with a dark cloud over it, but we can also say we've solved it instead of spending billions of dollars and getting nowhere. So that's one possibility, is focusing on brain health.
Okay.
And doing a documentary that would be life-changing for a lot of people.
That would be really exciting. And because this is, and the other area, I saw this couple, maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. I turned on my computer one morning and I saw that by 2050, that they're expecting Parkinson's
Yes.
to be just as aggressive as Alzheimer's and dementia currently are. Another brain disease that our grandparents maybe didn't worry about because they didn't live long enough, or maybe it wasn't even named at that point. Alzheimer's has been named for a long time. But what's your thoughts on that? Because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like these diseases of aging are more brain related than they are necessarily the rest of the body physically.
Brain health starts in the gut. So I think we have to go back to the original statement that, about cellular health and the gut being the kind of like the host computer of the body that does affect 90% of your serotonin, which affects your dopamine and your neurotransmitters in your brain, is made in the gut. So I would say that, yeah, Parkinson's is, you touched a nerve with me, because was married to a man for 40 plus years. We met when we were 14 years old and just ninth graders. And we ended up getting married. He was the captain of the Harvard football team. He was the captain of our high school football team. And he had lots and lots of injuries, knees that looked like railroad tracks, but probably a number of different concussions. And unfortunately, at early age, he contracted Parkinson's. No health genetic history anywhere in his family, but I'm sure it has something. I can't prove it, but I'm sure it has something to do with football and injuries that has become a big subject in the NFL is they've made the helmets much safer now because of CTE, and they made a movie with Will Smith about CTE, and CTE can morph into CTE and Parkinson's can be one and the same in the sense they just have different names and different symptoms, but my husband never had any health issues during his life. And all of a sudden he's got this disease. So if he had not died, I think we would have been able to solve the Parkinson's with today's technology, though. So that's another hopeful for people who have Parkinson's today. There's far more availability of cures than there was only a decade ago when he passed away.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the, if there's a good thing about any of these brain injuries, because I come from an athletic background, that concussions are very common as well. And my son was a hockey player. He had multiple concussions. I had multiple concussions playing judo. And one of the things that has become a blessing is that Boston Brain Bank, that what those guys are doing up there. And then with those ladies, actually run, I think that the head person is a woman, if I'm not mistaken. But regardless, that they are studying the brains of the cadavers of athletes that have passed away. But it's not only athletes. We find in the military a lot. People, especially the guys that have been in the bomb squads and things like that have been around explosions. But it goes back to, hey, you might have been 5 years old and fallen off your bike and hit your head, and it doesn't manifest itself till you're 65 or 70 years old. There's so much unknown. The only good thing is that there's been now lots of information and great researchers that are directed in that area that are working in it. So I think it's going to be like a lot of things. I think down the road, it's going to be, as you said earlier, hopefully, something we talk about like polio that's in the back window, God willing. Michelle, tell everybody about your podcast and how they can reach you and all that exciting stuff.
Well, Ageless and Timeless, and we have our own YouTube channel by the same name. And we have a website, www.agelessandtimeless.com. And we're on all the social media, Instagram and Facebook and TikTok even. I hate to admit that, but you almost have to join them to be a part of where all the young people are going for their information. We do a little bit mostly it's Instagram and Facebook is where you find us, but I have pages on both of those, and LinkedIn for business people mostly, because I do put some of the podcasts in total. You can put those on LinkedIn in their entirety, whereas the other ones are 30 seconds and you're done. Exactly. But the concept of Ageless and Timeless our mission statement is to provide information through our guests, who are the examples of knowledge and power, as I mentioned earlier, but through their experience and their knowledge to vicariously be able to learn and apply. And that's the key, is not just learning, but applying. So we're trying to inspire people to be proactive and to take steps. And we realize, as I have in my own life, that there are a lot of dead ends. And you're going to make mistakes. You're going to buy the wrong products. So much of this is about discernment. It's about filtering information that makes sense by being picky about considering your source, if you know what I'm saying.
Exactly. Michelle, this has been a lot of fun. We can talk about longevity probably for 3 hours.
Of course.
So I'd love to do this a second time if we can.
I would love that. Thank you, John. And I was so happy when John Hyland told me about you, because honestly, I did not know that Top Doctor magazine had you. So you can thank John Hyland for putting us together, because honestly, I thought it was only in copy and print. So that's good to know that he's quite an entrepreneur, isn't he?
Oh yeah. He's got his finger in a lot of different stuff, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I would enjoy being with you again.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Okay, you take care.
Okay.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.